Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Thursday, June 10th, 2021. The sun was blotted out, apparently, early this morning. I didn't see. I was blotting it out myself with curtains and closed eyelids. And I think the forecast for around here was for some overcast skies, so it wasn't looking like there was any real viewing opportunity, but I guess it wasn't so bad. Lots of people from around the country posting pictures of what the eclipse looked like in their neighborhoods. Pardon me, and I guess, it looked pretty good. So Twitter says everything went A-OK. The sun came back. It wasn't eaten by a giant dragon or anything of the sort. This was only even partially eaten anyway. So a dieting dragon, I guess, has consumed only part of the sun and then decided to change its mind. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now with that comment. And here's what Bill's got. We didn't give him a lot of fodder this morning. Let's see how magnetized Kagro X is this morning. That could be what's going on here. The frog in the throat is actually a mechanical device that's stuck there by the magnetism of my having... Yeah, okay. You know that story. I didn't even get to that yesterday. There was no time, of course, in between visits from Greg and Armando, which really honestly kept us on better stories anyway. But the rage of the internet yesterday morning, footage from a hearing of some kind. I don't even know what the nature of the hearing actually was in Ohio, in the Ohio state legislature, where, whether by design or by accident, I'm not sure, they had testimony offered not only from members of the public, but from supposed medical experts. A woman who began the day anyway as a licensed physician in Ohio, and I don't know how it's going now, how it started versus how it's going, who, I guess the big, widely circulated clip, and I guess I'd play it for you, except it's kind of crazy, and, you know, Greg's going to call, and you probably saw it yesterday, but her big claim, I guess the most surprising of her several very big claims, was that the vaccine, I couldn't tell whether she was talking about the vaccine or the effects that the vaccine had on others who were unvaccinated around you, because that's part of their conspiracy theory too, that sometimes the effects are spread beyond the people who actually are vaccinated by the vaccination itself, but that was magnetizing people, and she just kind of blurts out in the middle of her speech, among other things. And again, a significant portion of her clip, her video clip, is her saying, without any hesitation, I thought this, or I had this thought, and it's not been verified, and we don't have any evidence, and nobody's been able to prove it, but here are the things I think about this vaccine. So it was very, I guess, entertaining in that respect. But anyway, the idea was that the vaccine, the protein that is in the vaccine that teaches your body to produce the, I guess like a fake protein spike mimicking that of the coronavirus, so that the real coronavirus has nowhere to go, or what have you, or there's antibodies to that particular kind of protein spike. I forget exactly how it works. At this point, the fact that it works is enough, and that's all that matters. And I guess the fact that there's no metal portion to the vaccine at all. The theory here is there's also some metal in there, which there isn't. But even if there was, there couldn't possibly be enough to do what she's saying. And also, this isn't the thing that happens, that it was magnetizing people. And she said, I'm sure you've all seen all over the internet the videos of people who've become magnetized, and they press a key to their forehead and it sticks, or they put what else did she, I can't remember what else, the other examples, but, yes, that they were sticking forks and spoons all over their bodies as well, because they were so highly magnetized. No, I haven't seen any of those videos, although I'm curious whether this woman saw videos of people like hanging spoons off the end of their nose, which is a fairly old and for some reason, popular parlor trick of some kind, but nobody has ever claimed that it was, well, my nose is magnetized or anything like that. It was just, hey, look at this funny thing. There's a spoon on the end of my nose, and can you do it? I mean, I would suggest that people who press keys to their forehead and have them stick need a shower. Is what's happening here, or should wash their face. I mean, taking a relatively light metal object and sticking it to hot, sticky skin covered in oil, it's not magnetism. But then again, magnetism is something that people have famously been wondering aloud for many years how it works. So, dumb people, or people making jokes anyway. But this woman was, like I said, started the day as a doctor. I don't know how she's faring this afternoon. Peter, is it Major? Is that how he pronounces the name? He's a member of Congress, Republican, and maybe he is from Ohio. Offhand, I don't recall. But
Peter Meyer.
Meyer. Okay. It's got a J in it, and you know how foreigners pronounce those J's when they move to the United States. They don't. So anyway, yes, thank you. So you must have seen it. I just retweeted it. He's obviously making fun of it. He's just putting handfuls of paper clips on his forehead, and it's all falling off. And just, hey, can't figure it out. Not magnetized. I don't know where this one came from. This one really snuck up on me, but just
Denver Riggleman did one too.
State of the world. Did he?
He did a very good one. I don't know if you saw it, but it was very funny. He said, "Well, here's this is really interesting." He said. And of course, Denver Riggleman is a former Republican from Virginia, right? So
yes.
Relatively conservative guy who nonetheless is pretty sensible and has a pretty good sense of humor.
Right.
So he points out that out of the frame, but you could only see her hands, his wife is warming the key up with her hands.
Okay.
And if you press a warmed key to a somewhat sweaty body, as Riggleman points out, it sticks, but it won't work if it's cold.
Oh, okay. Well,
and so he does one of those things, and I saw it, and obviously the first thing I thought of also was spoons, and I was wondering if Uri Geller was in on this. Uri Geller, for those who don't remember, years and years ago, did this whole illusionist thing where he would claim to bend spoons with his will.
Sure.
And
yeah,
so I just wondered if he was behind the whole thing.
Maybe, because I thought...
He's still alive, though.
Spoons, like what was going on. And also, by the way, if you're really desperate to make the fork stick to your body, there's a way to do it. It's a little painful.
Yeah,
I don't recommend it.
Pitchforks, though.
But yeah, I mean, has anybody seen videos of it? Did anybody go searching for videos?
I don't know. That would have been a
sure you've seen it. Okay.
There were rabbit holes I just won't go down. I'll just read other people who do. Just
I mean that's
what they found.
The greatest use of Twitter. Really, it's quite a time saver.
Meanwhile.
I'm
going to skip the radical stuff there, and I'm going to go back to the revenge of the moderates here.
Oh, my God. What are they sticking to their bodies?
They're sticking to the script and winning some elections.
Oh.
So, today's view of the news, today's tour of news headlines
All right.
has a lot to do with how things work in the Senate. And, of course, you have experience on the Hill. I don't. I'm just an observer. But one of the things that's so interesting about trying to watch, for example, this infrastructure transportation stuff work is the idea that the way to get stuff done in the Senate is to divide the Senate into gangs.
Yes, they love gangs. I don't know if it works.
Gangs. But... Gang of 20, gang of 10, gang of 2, bang the gong. I mean, there's got to be some
Gangnam
sort
style.
of group that works together, because it's not like they can talk to each other or want to talk to each other.
Right.
So
sure, of course.
There was this bipartisan infrastructure group happening with Mitch McConnell's blessing, which meant it included not just Shelley Moore Caputo on lead. Interesting, because she happens to be from West Virginia, which is the same state as a relatively famous Joe Manchin. But that group also included, I think, Roy Blount and other people who could be considered leadership or friendly or close to leadership.
All right.
So that was the group that was working. And the idea was, if they came up with something, then it would pass because McConnell would bless it because they're close to leadership. That was the concept.
The cover. Right.
The cover. Well, but it wasn't going anywhere because leadership didn't want it to.
Yeah.
But that was the cover. That was the idea.
Right.
So when that failed, because basically the Republicans wouldn't move enough in the direction of where Biden thought it should go, there was a backup group. And the backup group is fascinating, okay? Because the backup group is essentially led on the Republican side by Rob Portman with the assistance of Bill Cassidy and Mitt Romney, and I'll get back to that, but remember those names. And then on the Democratic side, essentially is led by Kyrsten Sinema. And part of the deal there, well, with the assistance of Joe Manchin, and part of the deal there is that Sinema has spent a lot of time, and this is from a political article which I gave you, which is entitled Kyrsten Sinema Gets Her Make or Break Moment with Republicans. She spent a lot of time trying to create personal ties with Portman on the Republican side. So they have a pretty good working relationship, and according to the article, she actually has one of the best working relationships with McConnell of any Democrat, certainly way better than Schumer. Because to work with McConnell, I assume, is to not stand him. You can't stand him, the way Harry Reid used to not be able to stand him. But, so you have Sinema working with Portman across the aisle. And then the other Republicans, remember those names, Bill Cassidy and Mitt Romney. These are among the people who voted for the January 6th commission on the Republican side. They were the aye votes. Right. So these are the true moderates, not the leadership cover story for the first group. These are actual moderates who might actually be interested. Susan Collins is in this group. These are actual moderates who are perhaps interested in actually getting something done. And it includes Manchin and Sinema. And it includes the people on the Republican side who voted for the January 6th commission. And so what this piece in Politico writes about is how, of course, they're under the gun to get something done. It also includes Democratic moderates like John Tester.
Okay.
And part of the deal is that people like Tester and Sinema and Portman even didn't want to overshadow or steal the limelight from the other group while they were working. Manchin didn't want to take spotlight away from his fellow West Virginian while they were working on it. Portman didn't want to undercut the so-called leadership group while they were working on it. Nonetheless, this group was still in the background trying to figure out how to get stuff done. And part of the impetus for that is actually from the much maligned problem solvers group in the House side. Sinema may have been a member of that and has pretty good ties to them. So a lot of the ideas coming from that problem solvers group are in this bipartisan group here trying to get stuff done. Now, they may have they may have till this afternoon to get something done. Oh, well, okay. Then they take a break and then they go back. But it's just the dynamics there are pretty fascinating because you had the cover group that wasn't going to work because they were just too far apart.
Right.
They had the actual group which might work in theory because they actually are working relationship trying to figure stuff out, how to do things group. As Sherrod Brown put in the article, McConnell wanted Biden to fail. There aren't even 10 Republicans who are willing to talk to us about compromise. And if we get 10 Republicans, you probably lose some Democrats if it's too squishy, middle-of-the-road minimalist.
Okay.
Whereas Collins' view was she wants Biden to be a little bit more flexible. Remember, she was blaming Biden. For whatever fails, she blames Biden. Her colleague Murkowski blames fellow Republicans, but Collins blames Biden. But basically, she wants Biden to accept that the amount of money is going to be less and that it should be more focused on actual infrastructure.
All right.
And so, that may or may not work with Biden in terms of what he wants, but and as again, the article puts it, the Democrats go it alone chorus is going louder by the day, But you have to have Sinema and Manchin in that group in order to push Democrat-only solutions. So what that means, in effect, is you have to let Sinema and Manchin try, even if they fail. You have to have that. You're not going to get them to vote with you unless you let them do it their way first, which goes back to the old apocryphal, Winston Churchill saying, America always does the right thing after trying everything else first. Okay. So you have to do this. It's just the way it has to be. And Angus King, quote, "It's a good test because this isn't deep policy. It's not particularly partisan. If you can't make it on this, it's a bad sign." Mm-hmm. And Tester said they're going to meet again today. And if we don't get a deal pretty damn quick, we're not going to have one. So it'll be pretty quick today. He said by the time senators head for their home states Thursday afternoon, that would be this afternoon, they would know whether a bipartisan agreement would materialize. And so, I can be patient. I can wait till this afternoon.
I guess if that's all I have to wait, I'll be willing to do it. I'm busy until 11. So.
Right. So I'm busy till 11. So I'm not going to yell at them for everything.
Yeah. Well, I might, as I have to do something from 10.
Well, I can wait. I can wait till tomorrow.
Oh, yeah, you can. Right. No, me, I have to fill the time.
I can wait till Monday to yell at him. You have to yell at him now.
Yes. All right. Well, I can put that on the schedule.
But that's the background to this. I think it's pretty interesting in terms of the interpersonal relations and the, who is meeting first. It reminds me of the old pecking order, academia, right? No. If you have a meeting with a full professor and you're an assistant professor, you're allowed to assist professors. You're not yet promoted, so you're not yet available to associate with professors. But, if you're having a meeting with a full professor, it's in the full professor's office. It's not in your office. It's just the way it's done. The senior person gets to have the meeting in their office. The senior people were running the infrastructure talks first. They had to fail before the junior people who may actually have a chance to get this done have a chance to meet. Now, the downside, of course, of having junior people do it is it doesn't have McConnell's blessing. It doesn't have leadership's blessing. You know what that means. And so that's kind of tough. It's just that the pressure to get this done, if they actually came up with an agreement, would be pretty enormous. So it's not easily blown off.
Okay. I mean, we can work hard and blow it off later.
Yeah. And again, Portman is the key there because he's got a foot in both camps, the leadership camp and the moderate let's work on stuff camp. So just an interesting Portman's an interesting guy. He doesn't really he's not easily categorized, just like Mike DeWine in Ohio is not easily categorized because he does stuff that sometimes surprises you. So that's the background for all of this discussion.
Be ex-senators.
And I just there's a lot of focus on Manchin. We're going to talk about Manchin today. But, Sinema is definitely in that mix. So the 6 senators who voted to advance the January 6th commission, as a reminder, are Cassidy, Collins, Murkowski, Portman, Romney, and Sass. Right. And so with Portman taking the lead, with Romney also being involved, they go back and they report to their other smaller group of people who are willing to, vote for January 6th commission. And then they take it back to the larger group of senators on their conference and see whether or not there's any interest in there at all. And so if you hear from people like Roy Blunt, you're hearing what McConnell really thinks. If you're hearing from people like Portman, you don't really know what you're hearing. He's probably just speaking his own mind. Cassidy certainly is.
Yeah, he does tend to do that. All right, well, if we can translate it into votes.
For that. So keep an eye on those folks. And again, all right, they wanted the chance to be bipartisan. Here it is. What happens if that fails? Well, we get to see. That's when Manchin's vote really comes into play. You got to have this stuff first. It's just, you have to have it. You have to do it this way in order to get him to where you would like him to be. And is there any chance that may happen? Well, here's a Sarah Binder piece, and I always read Sarah Binder, always. This is in Monkey Cage in Washington Post today. Why is Manchin such a thorn in the Democratic Party's side? Let's count the reasons. Here's what political science tells us about party outliers. Number one, it's not easy being blue in a red state. Former President Donald Trump secured 68% of the vote in West Virginia in the 2020 election, all but matching his high of under 70 in Wyoming last fall. That means Manchin represents the reddest state of any of his Democratic colleagues. Even John Tester, who represents the next one, only faced an electorate that gave Trump 57% of the vote. You can see the difference between how Tester acts and how Manchin acts.
Right.
Now, 50 years ago, political science David Mayhew wrote about the importance of the, quote, electoral connection for understanding what makes lawmakers tick. Re-election. Re-election is every legislator's immediate goal. We've said that on the show all the time. Their major job is to get reelected. Everything else is like, how do you do that? Mm-hmm. So they're not policy people. You don't elect people to deep think policy. There's no Daniel Patrick Moynihan's. That's a unicorn, right? These are people who are elected so that they can get reelected. Mm-hmm. No matter what other goals might motivate them, none of their ambitions, policy or otherwise, can be achieved if they're not first reelected. So in that sense, it's a very practical sort of thing and very easy to understand.
Sure.
You can yell at them for it, but that's what they do, and there's a reason for it. Mm-hmm. So even if you like, let's say, a Cory Booker's policy approach, you got to reelect him in order to get it done.
Yes.
So Manchin's electoral environment back home best accounts for why he's out of step with much of the Senate Democratic caucus. And, yeah, you can talk about the fact that West Virginians like a lot of Biden's policies. And, you can talk about the fact that Manchin has his own brand and this and that. But there's a second piece to it. And we saw this with Susan Collins when she was reelected. And that is Manchin cooks in his own home style. A concept coined by the late political scientist Richard Fenno Jr. to capture how lawmakers present and explain themselves back home. We modern people say, well, Susan Collins had her own brand, so she could run on that. And Manchin has his. So does Tester. So Manchin's home style comes through clearly in his campaign ad, shooting a copy of the Democrats' 2010 cap-and-trade bill, riding his Harley through West Virginia countryside, blaming both parties for deadlock, attacking Republican lawsuit to strike down Obamacare. He presents himself as opposing partisan agendas all around. That's his shtick. So naturally, when you ask him about things like filibusters or voting rights bills, his brand is, well, I got to be bipartisan.
Yes.
Okay. But there's another piece to that he gets reinforced by. It isn't just West Virginia voters. It's the other Democrats who sort of agree with him but don't want to be front and center about it, and they just assume Manchin be the lightning rod because Manchin's perfectly willing to be that.
Right. That's a big favor to them.
Yeah. Jackie Rosen, Democrat, Nevada, Angus King, Independent, Maine, Chris Coons, John Tester. None of them love getting rid of the filibuster, but they'd much rather you ask Manchin about it than them.
Yes, that's true.
Right? It takes a nuclear option off the table, at least for now, potentially lessening any pressure on their colleagues to choose sides. But Manchin did not reject using filibuster-proof budget tools to advance Democrats' policy. And so we don't know what's going to happen after he gets to try what he is doing in his own way by being part of the new moderate center group that has till this afternoon to come up with something to satisfy John Tester, So we'll have to see how that plays out. But again, this is just how it had to be.
Okay. Well,
I thought that was a pretty cogent explanation of what's going on here.
Yeah. I don't know why it's considered a practical approach to anything, but that's what they decided to do. Give themselves until Thursday afternoon and then start negotiating on Thursday morning. And,
all right,
so
let me throw in these two pieces here and then get back to picking on Manchin and why that's not always a good idea. This one is from the Washington Post and has to do with Virginia. Okay. Democratic establishment tightens its hold on the party as far-left candidates fall short. Democratic primary voters have been turning away this year from the anti-elite furies that continue to roil Republican politics, repeatedly choosing more moderate candidates promising steady leadership over disruptors from the party's left wing. Tuesday's elections in Virginia, which brought the renomination of former Governor Terry McAuliffe and primary losses by three of the Democrats' most outspoken liberal delegates, only underscored a pattern that was previously apparent in special House elections in Louisiana and New Mexico. New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, a moderate Democrat, won his party's nomination without a challenge from the left after two protest candidates failed to collect 1,000 signatures. And in the crowded Democratic primary in New York City, a similar crop of contenders, including Eric Adams and Andrew Yang, have emerged as frontrunners by pushing platforms that include an embrace of police as an essential component of public safety. Although I would add, latest poll out actually has Eric Adams in front, and in second place isn't Andrew Yang, it's Maya Wiley, who's getting a whole bunch of endorsements this week.
Yeah.
Really kind of interesting. But it's ranked choice voting, so you don't really know what these polls mean because none of them are accounting for that.
Good point. Yeah, and he's had his own, let's say, rough news cycle.
Who, Yang?
No, Adams.
Well, it's a question of where he lives.
Yes. Well, it's a big deal if you're running for mayor in New York. You should live in New York.
Maybe not. People actually care about a whole. This is one of those things where outsiders say, "Oh, this is a big deal," and everybody, New Yorkers saying, "Nah."
I'm surprised by that. All right. Well,
we elected Robert Kennedy. We elected Hillary Clinton. We don't really care where you live.
Yeah, that's true, but I mean, it's like if you're a national figure and say, I'd like to make whatever. New York, but both of them did say, I will now make New York my home, as opposed to the guy who's not a national figure who says, I was telling you New York was my home and it isn't.
Yeah, but, New Yorkers are, okay, that's nice. What are you going to do for me?
They certainly are about that. I would have thought that you would see New Yorkers say, I still take pride in being a New Yorker and toughing it out here. And what are you doing? Fort Lee. Are you kidding? All right.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. If you center it around being Fort Lee.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose that's because...
Mr. Richard Fader from Fort Lee, New Jersey says, he doesn't really care.
All right, well, he doesn't, but he thinks it's fun.
Anyway, the point is that the moderates are actually doing fairly well. And so, there is impetus for a Manchin to not worry about such things as, you don't like what I'm doing? What are you going to do? Primary me? With who? In West Virginia? Let's get real.
Well, could be somebody from New Jersey. You never know.
Right. And I think that would not play well in West Virginia.
Okay, well, that's entirely possible. Sure. Okay.
Completely different than New York.
Okay, well, they are a different group of people. We'll see. That would be interesting, though. Yeah, hi, I'm from Fort Lee, New Jersey, and I'm running for Senate from West Virginia. It worked in New York, and they would say, I don't know why you would think that would work here. I have no idea. All right, we'll be right back. I got to go to Fort Lee.
Hi, I'm Scott Anderson, the guy that writes the daily summary for this show, Kagro in the Morning. Thank you to everyone that supports this show. Many of you send donations through PayPal, Patreon, Square Cash, Radio Public, and so on. Some of you write your own essays and send them in, or read articles with your own commentary. We appreciate it. Now, some of you are listening to this and thinking, I'd like to help, but isn't there something I could do that wouldn't require money or effort? Why, yes, there is. You can just like us. On Daily Kos, they call it the recommend button. YouTube has a thumbs up. There are hearts and likes and love buttons. Tap our love button. Tap our love button every day. Share our shows and summaries on Facebook and Twitter, YouTube and iTunes, Stitcher and Amazon. Most of these places allow you to write a review, so a sentence or two would be great. Recommend us to social media, or tell your friends to listen to the show. You aren't just helping us, you're helping them find their new favorite thing to listen to. You could change the world. So thank you in advance from me and everybody else in the world.
Welcome back to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Roots Radio. Greg Dworkin still with us. Plenty more to cover. Where were we?
We were talking about Louis Gohmert and the fact that he would really like the experts to let him know whether we could alter the orbit of the moon or perhaps the Earth.
Yes, we can.
In order to help with things like climate change.
Yes, the Forest Service has to do that.
Well, I think it has to do with Jewish lasers, but he didn't want to say that because he knows it gets bad publicity.
Yeah, right. You'll get kicked off the committee and you won't be able to ask your very important questions.
Right.
Yeah,
so, that goes back to, well, if we're saying that moderates are doing well, at least on the Democratic side, what about the radicals on the Republican side? How are they doing?
What about it?
Well, here's a piece, letter from Pueblo in Politico magazine, where voters are losing patience with Lauren Boebert. Swing voters in Pueblo, Colorado's Steel City. So they're getting frustrated with the U.S. representative they see as more focused on her own celebrity than her constituents.
Well, hello. Yes.
Hello. They keep seeing all these videos of saying, I'm not here to serve anybody but my constituents. That's what I do, why I do what I do. And then you try to call her to say, well, I have a constituent issue and she's busy and she won't meet with you.
If she did,
because she's
she
too
wouldn't know
busy
what to tell
doing
you.
these videos explaining why she's all about her constituents.
Exactly. Yeah, there's I could see that. That seems very likely that people who are used to having, congressional representation would be upset with her. She's horrible. I mean, and just even her stunt videos aren't good either. And she's just not, I don't know, congressing whether she's there in Washington or not, and she rarely is. She's taking tremendous advantage of the remote work availability under the COVID pandemic. And this morning circulating was a video, I saw Oliver Willis sharing it, of her, remote participation in a hearing, although I guess the House is still in recess, so it makes more sense that she's there. But she's given up even dedicating space in her house for this thing. She's back to running the restaurant and is participating in these hearings from the restaurant, which is a little odd. And well, anyway, if you saw the video of her questioning, I think she was in the budget committee, questioning White House budget officials, and it's nonstop ideological speech making that has nothing whatsoever to do with the budget, just like Gohmert and the Forest Service and the orbit of the moon. They just are trying to put on a show, and she's actually particularly bad at a lot of things, and that's one of them. She just doesn't put on a good show, so she doesn't even really keep the base entertained, and then the rest of the district is just
she's really not that
here?
Entertaining. But here's Politico on the area she's from. Pueblo County, located on Colorado's dusty, windswept plains 2 hours south of Denver, is the swingiest part of Boebert's district, making it a key test of her staying power. The county's nothing like the conservative, government-skeptical towns west of the Continental Divide, where Boebert's from, or the glitzy liberal ski areas like Aspen, where she also represents. While Boebert's district overall is purple, 32% Republican, 26% Democrat, 40% unaffiliated. We're used to that in Connecticut. Most people here are neither of the above. The Pueblo County electorate flips that with 36% Democrats, 25% Republicans, 37% unaffiliated, and big money donors here often give to candidates from opposing parties. Independents vote Republican, Blue Dog Democrats skew conservative. So Boebert's Democratic opponent in the 2020 race won this county by 204 votes. So it's a even Steven kind of district.
Yeah.
Biden won by 1,520 votes in November after Trump had claimed victory by 390 in 2016. That's why they're looking to see how she does here. So if it's an even Steven district and she's losing support here, that's sort of bad for her. The question obviously as well, is it outnumbered by all the other places where she's doing just fine? And that remains unclear.
Okay. Well, she's going to help clear it up if she keeps producing video like this.
Yeah. I'll give you an image of the district, which maybe you could link to when you do the roundup later, because, sort of interesting. Small towns are small towns. This feels like small town anywhere.
Where does it come from? Where does this come from, this image?
It's Pueblo. It's from Politico.
It's in the Politico
piece that
article?
I gave you.
Okay. All right. Well, we'll definitely be linking to that. Oh, a nice collage of
stuff.
Folks from around town. And what is that building? Okay.
Older stuff. Just, your basic building.
Yeah. Okay.
It's in the evening where things are sort of lit up. It's across the street from the police department. It's got an old Sunoco sign, a Jesus Saves cross, a Corona. It looks like the sort of collection you might see in any bar.
Yeah, it does. And I'm wondering, what is that thing? And I don't know. It looks like the back of the building anyway, but all right. Artsy-ish, maybe?
Yeah, maybe sort of.
Okay.
Anyway, so, that's how things are going throughout the country. And then Perry Bacon takes a look at, well, how does Biden fit with all of this? Remember, Biden is from a creature of the Senate, from the Senate.
Yes.
And Perry Bacon writes today, many Democrats, both in the party centrist wing and even on the left, view the past 5 months as a story of the good Joe and the bad Joe. Good Joe, President Biden. Bad Joe, of course, is Democratic senator from West Virginia.
Oh, okay.
And Perry Bacon, is somewhat skeptical of this narrative, as am I. There are some signs that President Biden and his team, Perry Bacon writes, while not totally prisoner to what I view as old and misguided norms of the Democratic Party, aren't fully free of them either, so it's not old Joe Manchin's fault. Biden is Biden because he's Biden, not because of Joe Manchin. So here's where Biden has to be careful about falling into self-defeating norms. Number one, a mistaken view of the electorate. We talked a lot about the electorate yesterday in terms of George Packer's article. The Democratic Party has long operated from a 1996 view of the U.S. electorate. There's a big mass of swing voters who break away from whichever party is too extreme. And in the late 90s, the view was true. And that's how Clinton won. It's just the soldier stuff, school uniforms. But it's not true now because the electorate is so much more polarized. There just aren't that many swing voters. So what you do is you mobilize people to vote or not vote rather than change anybody's mind. So when Biden aides suggest that the infrastructure negotiations will help the president politically, even if no deal gets done, that suggests at least some of the president's orbit are operating in an outdated paradigm. There's virtually no evidence that a block of voters who would otherwise back Republicans will instead support Democrats if they perceive Biden as really trying hard to be bipartisan.
Okay.
Right? Now, he is doing it because he thinks it's the right thing to do, not because, it's the magical key to getting congressional Democrats reelected. But at the same time, bringing home the bacon always matters, especially if you can sell it locally.
Yeah, or if your name is Bacon.
Especially. And over-reliance on polling.
All right.
Biden's initial refusal and then quick reversal to increase refugee admissions this year reeked of such poll-centric decision-making. Polls show that voters have less favorable views of Biden on immigration compared to other issues, and the White House is likely wary of moves that make Biden seem too lax. But with a heavy polarized electorate and swing voters who are often disengaged, almost no policy decision is going to matter much. And there's no value in taking a poll-based stand and then immediately backtracking from it. Biden is like Manchin. He eventually does the right thing after trying everything else first.
Mm-hmm.
Then number three, conservatism. It just still sticks around. The mindset is that you have to be conservative to win. Muscular executive action might seem radical to people in Biden's circle, but the administration is avoiding a powerful avenue to enact policies that would also be good politically and substantively. And when I say conservatism, I mean, don't go and do bold things like Franklin Roosevelt. Do incremental things like Barack Obama.
Oh, okay.
And so that's why he's not making these big, in Perry Bacon's view, that's why he's not making big sweeping executive action sort of things. Why don't you just make a commission that's going to look into January 6th? You have the power to do that.
Yeah, why?
Yes, but there's reasons not to, including, buy-in and so on and so forth. Let the House do it. That's the kind of argument where that sort of thing falls into. There's not a right and a wrong. You could do it either way, depending upon how you structured it. But, that's the way Biden's looking at it in Barry Bacon's view. Number four, a desire to return to normal. But the Republican Party's on an anti-democratic racist course, and Biden and the Democrats have to accept that the Republicans have basically thrust them into a partisan, uncivil war. They have to fight and win the war instead of wishing it away. That's why the moves are so important to try to mollify Sinema and Manchin. You have to let them fail if, in fact, it's going to fail in order to get them to see it. Because otherwise they're going to, try to do this bipartisan thing. And if it works, great. Then the people who thought it was impossible were wrong. And if it doesn't work, great, because then perhaps Biden can get Manchin and Sinema and Biden himself to see there's no other way.
Yes, it can't take a year.
Just can't take a year. That's why I'm happy to give it till this afternoon.
Right. The clock's ticking.
I just think it's reasonable to wait till this afternoon.
Yeah.
I'm a reasonable centrist.
Right. Why not?
You have 3 hours.
Right. Exactly. And as a matter of fact, you got to fix it, do it in this room, and in 3 hours we're going to tear gas you.
Right. Because by then the pizza's cold. You think of it as tear gassing you. I think of it as the pizza's cold by then. So,
look, anything you need to do to deliver that pizza, if the president
for those of you outside of D.C., they get all their pizza from We the Pizza.
True.
Which is a great. I don't know how the pizza is, but it's a great name.
Yeah. Right. I don't know. Pretty good though. We'll take it. All right. And if it's your pizza in 30 minutes, or they tear gas you.
Right. And then the last point that Perry Bacon makes is on elitism. The United States is in the middle of a broad power struggle between the wealthy white Christian men. And remember, we talked about this yesterday a little bit in terms of where they fit with smart America.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Okay.
Right? The wealthy white Christian men who have historically been dominant than everyone else, Republican lawmakers feel this acutely because most of them are wealthy white Christian men. But the real power brokers in the Democratic Party, including Biden's inner circle of longtime advisors, they skew more white, more wealthy, and more male than the party's voters. And that's important because it means top Biden aides are somewhat distant from the struggles of the people they're supposed to be fighting for. They're probably never going to have a hard time voting or need Medicaid or unemployment benefits. The Biden White House has not made beating back the wave of GOP laws targeting black voters a centerpiece of its agenda. And I, Perry Bacon Jr., worry this is in part because most Biden aides will never feel the bite of those laws in the way that black people who live in the GOP-dominated states do.
Maybe.
All the more interesting in terms of having Kamala Harris on that ticket and part of that discussion.
Yeah.
It's still early, and no president is ever fully unfettered in the system. It's always going to be hard to tell the difference between Biden constrained by forces beyond his control and one hemmed in by self-imposed limits. But after seeing the past 50 days, I'm much less confident that this will be a presidency of bold action than I was after the first 100. Well, look, it's a very practical thing. You're not going to have a bold administration with bold action unless you can get rid of the filibuster. So anything short of that is going to be short of bold.
Yes.
Because you can't get stuff done. You can't. And we're seeing it with infrastructure.
Yeah. The 100 days are exciting because that's where the bold stuff happens, as opposed to like, wow, 2 digits worth of days. That's exciting by itself. Right. Yeah. I mean, that's okay. That's sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy there. But I guess things could be bold afterwards, too. There's always that. But I don't think anybody said that was going to be the case.
Right. So meanwhile, Biden's on his way to Europe. Greg Sargent writes, President Biden is traveling to Europe, where he'll make a rousing case that the rebounding United States is prepared to lead the global struggle. But he's taking a hands-off approach to Joe Manchin. You see, Manchin's dominating all of this stuff. On voting rights, and the president has reportedly not urged Manchin to reconsider his opposition to the package of voting reforms or ending the filibuster, which probably dooms it. And the juxtaposition signals a deep tension. How can Biden basically go to Europe and sell democracy if he can't deal with democracy at home is the theme of the article. And it's also the theme of E.J. Dion's article. Advancing democracy abroad requires defending it at home. So again, I think everybody's sort of in agreement that democracy is at risk. The question is, what are you going to do about it? And again, I don't know that the moderate centrist approach is the correct one, but given the bunch of bad choices you have because of Manchin's positioning and the inability to get more than 50 votes in the last election, it is what it is. And so this is probably the best chance of getting something done is to let Manchin try to do it his way first. It's just the most practical thing to do, regardless of how you feel about the outcome being, if you want to get there. We all agree on the strategy, but as far as the tactics go, you got to let Manchin do his thing. You got to let Sinema do her thing. You got to let them try because there's no way to recruit them otherwise.
Yeah, other than tackling them and
it's not going to work.
Right, skinning them and using their outer shell.
I can tell you a bunch of ways it won't work. Well, you got to put pressure on them. Well, how? How in any way, shape, or form are they beholden to you that you can put pressure on them?
You stand around them and yell.
Yeah, well, that'll do it.
Well, that's one way. I mean,
that
it might
helps
not work,
them at home because if their brand is being independent, they say, good, bring it on. I welcome your hate.
True, right? And you can say, see, I'm helping you. So now you help me.
Yeah. So anyway, I just thought that was all kind of interesting.
Yeah.
And again, if you go back to Packer's idea that there's this real America, which is the MAGA folks, the Sarah Palin people, that you're never going to win over, ever. But you at least have to know who they are so you can accommodate them. And my point of view is I always think you have to outvote them. I don't think you can negotiate with them. But I'm okay with not sticking a fork in their eye and claiming it was from the vaccine. Yeah, right. Because these are the folks who sometimes don't vote, but when they do, they don't vote the way you want. And I'd just as soon have them stay home.
Yeah. Well, if you can keep them there, that's fine.
And then there's the Smart America group, which was fully represented by Barack Obama and Bill Clinton before him in terms of the trade agreements that, in the end, you have to step back and say, actually didn't really do people well in the Midwest and other manufacturing places.
Yeah.
The part of the article we didn't spend a lot of time on because I'm just not comfortable with it being anywhere close to accurate is the Justice America group. You know, the people in the ACLU who say it's important to preserve liberal causes. These are the people who would not have defended the Nazi march on Skokie.
Okay.
As opposed to the free speech people who are the libertarian group of Americans, the free Americans.
Okay.
Because no matter how distasteful it is, you know, free speech is everything, and that's why we exist, and so you have to defend that. And so, again, the ACLU had this big fight, you may recall, and America had this big fight about what do you do? Do you defend Nazis' right to march because it's a free speech issue? Or do you not defend Nazis' march because, like, it's deplorable?
Yeah. Sounds like fodder for an after-school special.
Well, you know,
it was.
but there are groups of Americans who fall in either camp, and you know, it's the very rich libertarians, the Peter Thiels of the world, who are trying to rip everybody else off. You know, I don't spend a whole lot of time there because it doesn't make a lot of sense that there's a lot of people that fall in that category. But the free speech folks certainly represent a group of Americans.
Yes.
And the Justice Americans who think that, look, you know, what we're seeing is just intolerable because look at the effects it has. That's a very diverse group and a little bit harder to explain and pigeonhole. So
yes.
I've shied away from doing that. If his four groups of Americas falls short, it's probably the explanation of that particular faction.
Why
but
not
I just
five?
thought his Sarah Palin Real America stuff was spot on.
Yeah, it seems to have captured the essence of it. Maybe you need 5 groups, or it's 4A and B there.
Yeah.
All right.
You know, it's many people have pointed out, you know, having white liberals talk about the justice component from their particular point of view may be missing some things here.
Okay, A, B, and C then. And as many as you want. Yeah, I can.
But why
that
is it
point.
important? Well, you know, look at it from any angle you want to, and this stuff's going to come up. For example, there's a new article by the excellent Ed Young on the pandemic in the Atlantic today.
Yeah.
The fundamental question of the pandemic is shifting. We understand how this will end, but who bears the risk that remains? And he's pointing out how the CDC and their mask advice is violating a lot of the stuff that public health exists for. Your individual doctor is supposed to talk to you about your individual risk.
Yes.
Public health is supposed to talk about the public risk, not your individual risk. Right? Get vaccinated or wear a mask until you do, Biden said after the CDC announced this new guideline. The choice is yours.
I see.
But public health shouldn't be making a choice where the choice is yours.
Okay.
Public health should be saying this is what the country needs to do as a group.
Yeah. I guess that's all right. I can see that.
From its founding, the U.S., he writes, has cultivated a national mythos about the capacity of individuals to pull themselves up by the bootstraps, ostensibly by their own merits. You can see why I'm relating this to what Packer was writing about.
Okay.
This particular strain of individualism, which valorizes independence and prizes personal freedom, transcends administrations. It has also repeatedly hamstrung America's pandemic response. It explains why the U.S. focused so intensely on preserving hospital capacity instead of on measures that would have saved people from needing the hospital. It explains why so many Americans refuse to act for the collective good, although, by the way, I don't think that's quite right. Preserving hospital capacity is saving people from needing a hospital. That was the whole point about isolation and masking. It explains why so many Americans refuse to act for the collective good, whether by masking up or isolating themselves. And it explains why the CDC, despite being the nation's top public health agency, issued guidelines that focused on freedoms that vaccinated people might enjoy. The move signaled to people with the newfound privilege of immunity that they were liberated from the pandemic's collective problem. It also hinted to those who were still vulnerable that the challenges are now theirs alone, and worse, that their lingering risk was their fault. If you're not vaccinated, that's taking your responsibility for your own health in your own hands, Walensky said. Rachel Walensky, head of the CDC. But neither is true. Neither is true, writes Ed Young. About half of Americans have yet to receive a single vaccine dose. For many of them, lack of access and not hesitancy is the problem. The pandemic is still just that, a pandemic, raging furiously around much of the world, which still threatens large swaths of highly vaccinated countries, including some of the most vulnerable citizens. It's still a collective problem, whether or not Americans are willing to treat it as such. And individualism can be costly in a pandemic. It represents one end of a cultural spectrum with collectivism on the other. You know, your gimmitarianism is like the one end. So the free America is gimmitarianism.
Real America.
And it exists, and everybody knows about it, and you talk about it in your own way. And it's clearly, part and parcel of the fabric of politics here, because it affects how people approach things. And so that ought to be combated by the people who are communitarians or collectivism here. That's not socialism. Mm-hmm. It's trying to protect people the best possible way, in their view, which includes things beyond, it's just your choice. It's not. This is an infectious disease. It's not your choice whether you get infected or not. Somebody infected you.
That's true. Well, some people will say, I chose it, or I had a COVID party.
Not to. How do you choose not to? Well, clean living and eat cheese. Right. Well, these things are not going to save you. I don't really care what Goop writes.
Yes.
You don't have any choice about these things, and so that's why it has to be a collective approach. 2 studies found that more strongly individualistic countries tended to rack up more COVID-19 cases and deaths. Third suggested that more individualistic people from the U.S., UK, and other nations were less likely to practice social distancing. A fourth showed that mask wearing was more common in more collectivist countries, U.S. states and U.S. counties, a trend that held after accounting for factors including political affiliation, wealth, and the pandemic severity. And these correlative studies of all limited, but across them a consistent pattern emerges when supported by a closer look at the U.S. response. From the very beginning, I've thought the way we've dealt with the pandemic reflects our narrow focus on individuals. Camara Jones, a social epidemiologist at Morehouse School of Medicine, told me, testing, for instance, relied on slow PCR-based tests. This approach makes intuitive sense. If you're sick, you need to know why, but it doesn't address the problem of where is the virus actually? How do you stop it? Instead, the U.S. could have widely distributed rapid antigen tests. This is something that Michael Mina from Harvard Public School of Health said very early on. We need the rapid tests. Don't worry about whether they're super duper accurate. Worry about whether you know right now what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
By the way, they're now available. You can buy them. 15-minute tests.
Great.
You don't need
Just
a prescription.
when I need it. Yeah. Well, we were
Instead, yeah, but it's good that they have them. But that's the kind of approach which makes a whole lot more sense. The U.S. also largely ignored other measures that could have protected entire communities, such as better ventilation. We talked about this. It's an airborne disease. Cleaning your books and deep cleaning the surfaces doesn't help you with an airborne disease. You need better ventilation. Yes, that's expensive. Suck it up.
That's the problem.
You can buy cheap CO2 monitors so at least know what's going on with your individual inside rooms. High filtration masks for essential workers, free accommodation for people who needed to isolate themselves, sick pay policies. As the country focused single-mindedly on vaccine and Operation Warp Speed sped ahead, that was Trump's strategy. That's why it was a national strategy. Mm-hmm. Collective protections were left in the dust. And as vaccines were developed, the primary measure of their success is whether they prevented symptomatic disease in individuals, which is great, But even if the U.S. doesn't achieve herd immunity, vaccines will offer a measure of collective protection. And that's true. There's actually a new article out today in Nature magazine. Eric Topol just tweeted on it. Evidence that vaccination not only protects individuals who've been vaccinated, but also provides cross-protection to unvaccinated individuals in the community, particularly kids. Kids benefit from high percentage of adults being vaccinated. That's all wonderful.
Okay.
But it still doesn't deal with those who don't have access to vaccines and, trying to prevent infections in the first place.
Yes. Well, it's harder than it seems to. You were mentioning the cost, for instance, of addressing issues like ventilation, but
like in your local schools, which is going to be a local issue.
Yeah, but it's very difficult to get that by people who either don't understand it or just simply are like, well, I'd rather this remote thing is working fine. Why don't we just do that until the air clears?
Right. But here's the catch, right? Unvaccinated people aren't randomly distributed. They tend to cluster together socially and geographically, writes Ed Young, enabling the emergence of localized COVID outbreaks.
Yes.
Right? Sturgis.
Yeah.
Partly, these clusters exist because vaccine skepticism grows within cultural and political divides, the South, and spreads through social networks, Facebook. But they also exist because decades of systemic racism have pushed communities of color into poor neighborhoods and low-paying jobs, making it harder for them to access healthcare in general and vaccines in particular. South Texas.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so all this stuff that we talked about over the months in terms of politics show up in pandemic preparation, planning, and results. And again, you have a situation where if the community doesn't take care of it, individuals are going to be severely limited by what they can do, and yet the power of the individual is pretty potent, which is my feeling for why different governmental state approaches to the pandemic wound up with similar results, and that's because people decided on their own, not what the governor was saying, what makes sense and what doesn't make sense, which is one of the reasons why people still wear masks.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. So according to a Kaiser Family Foundation survey, a third of unvaccinated Hispanic adults want a vaccine as soon as possible, twice the proportion of unvaccinated whites, but 52% of this group were worried they might need to miss work because of the side effects, and 43% feared that getting vaccinated could jeopardize their immigration status.
Oh.
So unsurprisingly then, among the states that track racial data for vaccinations, just 32% of Hispanic Americans have received at least one dose by May 24th, compared with 43% of white people. Right? The proportion at least of at least partly vaccinated black people were lower still at 29%. And black people now account for 82% of COVID-19 cases in Washington, D.C., up from 46% by the end of last year. So the vaccines have begun to quench the pandemic inferno, but the remaining flames are still burning. And keep that in mind because it's disproportionately going to hit disadvantaged communities, and with variants like the Delta variant from India, it's going to be a problem still. So the pandemic isn't over, and we're at the end game, but the end game is still going to be difficult. So that's it for me.
Yeah, and, I guess so. The music says so.
Yeah, and then I'll talk to you on Monday.
All right, that's true. By the way, I did read about there is an epsilon out there already, so we're on to the next letter, and maybe by Monday we'll know what that is and where it is. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. We got an hour left to go over everything else in the world. We'll start with this very important announcement, and it really is very important. This is constituent service here. I just wanted to thank Eve Norton, who chimes in via Twitter, EveN59, if you feel like following along, and I think you should, but just letting Greg and I know, and we'll probably come back to this subject, because Lauren Boebert is kind of dumb, and we're tired of her. But anyway, for what it's worth, she says she was born and raised in Pueblo, left the area at first back in 1979, but came back relatively recently in 2018, and just offering to be a girl on the street, or we'll say non-specific gendered person. I don't know the preferred. Well, I do know now what the preferred language is because Eve says girl, so we'll take it and go with that. I'm supposed to stick with that as the pronouns, right? So girl on the street interview, if you will. And just, by the way, letting us know, Pueblo, not that bad. Doing pretty good. And it sounds like from the profile, I don't know whether you think Politico did you justice, but it sounds like the idea was to say, yeah, the people in Pueblo are not like Lauren Boebert, and she's not doing well there. So I think at least the overall impression I got was that, yeah, you're doing okay there in Pueblo. But thanks, Eve. I wanted to throw that out there in case we return to the subject. We can hopefully remember, yeah, you know what? We should see if we can get some insight on that, and maybe Eve has something to offer. All right. I guess the biggest story, trying to decide which one's the biggest. Okay, I think the biggest story not so far covered today has got to be the news yesterday that was I think the Interior Department Inspector General released a report which the credulous, network news media folks just basically swallowed and reported as stenography, making one of the more extraordinary claims about our understanding of the events from a year ago in Lafayette Square. And remember, that's been a story that's been developing over the last week plus, as we found out, for instance, the Justice Department in court defending against lawsuits seeking, I don't know what, but lawsuits accusing the police forces and Secret Service and White House political operation, et cetera, of violating everyone's civil rights by violently rousting them from Lafayette Square during a legitimate First Amendment protected protest. And the Justice Department was, I don't know, depending on your view of things, either stuck institutionally trying to defend government entities from suit here, or they really actually believed some relatively absurd positions. But they were, first of all, I guess, the first item that made news from the trial was that the Justice Department lawyers, I guess, I don't know whether they were not paying attention or tricked into it, or they just felt they had to disclose this. But the question that lingered for a year over whether or not actual tear gas was used in Lafayette Square, and maybe not just the pepper spray or the pepper balls, as others said, but there was a concerted effort from the White House and conservatives and the police forces, et cetera, to deny that tear gas had been used. In the face of insistence from reporters on the scene and others who have the experience necessary to recognize the presence of actual tear gas. And they're saying, no, it really was tear gas. No, the White House issued some vehement denials, strenuous denials, and insisting that reporters retract their stories and apologize to people, et cetera, et cetera. And then a year later, it turns out, they were right about the tear gas from the start. Then, in the course of things over the last couple of days, the story developed, I guess this too, growing out of the lawsuit. It was Department of Justice's position that everything that happened there was defensible because the president was present, and of course he crossed the street to do his stupid photo stunt, and the Secret Service and other police forces have every right to use just about any measure imaginable to secure the physical safety of the president. And just as we began parsing the question of, all right, well, what does that really mean? Because it can't be the case that, for instance, you can use nuclear weapons to clear the space because the president decides to go there at the last minute for no particular reason. Not only would that be unwise for the president's safety because, nuclear fallout and all that, but it's obviously pretty ridiculous to say, it's one thing to take extreme measures for the immediate physical safety of the president, who either finds himself unwittingly among a violent protesting crowd, or even if it's a relatively peaceful crowd, if there is some question about his ability to make it to an event where he's headed, whether for good reason or not. I guess, it makes some difference, at least in my mind. Is something scheduled? Is the president scheduled to move somewhere? You can't, I don't know how well you do with the idea that it's a First Amendment protected activity to block the ability of the president of the United States to, make his or her way to anything, even a fundraiser for that matter. But the idea that a president really could just spontaneously decide that the place he wants to be, and he doesn't really need to justify it to anyone, is right in the middle of that space that the protest that he doesn't like is occupying, and therefore it is open season, and you can shoot anybody you want because I want to go stand there. I just want to chew gum on that spot. That's very presidential of me, and you need to do it. So anyway, that possibility looming in the Justice Department, the logic, inside the logic of the Justice Department arguments. But to top it all off, now we have the Inspector General of the Interior Department coming out with a report that says, well, I got news for you. You all think that we cleared Lafayette Square so that the president could stage this stupid photo op. And I don't know whether they're trying to say, okay, we agree that's a dumb idea. That's not, or what. I think they just are taking no opinion on that. But they want to just say, well, just so you know, FYI, we were not clearing Lafayette Square for the president. We had no idea the president was even going to be there. We didn't tell anybody about it, which I think actually just argues more strongly for my point that, if it's not pre-planned, it's not something that you should be able to just make up your mind on the spur of the moment in general. Though I'm sure arguments could be made on a case-by-case basis that, there's a real reason that the president decides that they need to be at that spot for whatever reason. But, we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. But they say the real reason we were going to clear that square all the time, and I guess speaking somewhat to the point of the necessity of planning ahead for things like this, but we wanted to clear the area so that we could bring in contractors to put up an additional ring of protective fencing around the White House. And the crowd at Lafayette Square was right in the way of where we wanted to put the fencing. So what it was really all about was clearing the way for the fencing. You see, the president had nothing to do with it. We don't even need to inquire as to whether or not it made any sense for the president to do what he did. He just piggybacked on the pre-planned clearance of the square for the fencing contractors, which is, of course, absurd. And as Armando was tweeting earlier, the more people read it, the less they believe it. Mark Sumner has a piece up at Daily Kos about this, and I was just tweeting about it yesterday and just saying, this strikes you as absurd. Like you can use any measures you want for the physical safety of the movements of the President of the United States or fencing contractors. If a fencing contractor does it, that means it's not illegal. That's the new corollary to the Nixon doctrine. Used to be just the president, but now it's also fencing contractors. There's some question about the fence that they put up anyway, and whether it helped and did anything, or whether it was even legal to put the fence where they put it. And of course, if you have eyes and you look at the pictures from the day, the dominant photos of the day would, let's say, accepting the actual picture of Trump with the Bible in his hand, holding it up awkwardly. The pictures that dominate the memories of the day, I think, are the photo of the police actually standing shoulder to shoulder, lining a path from the White House to the church for Trump to stride through alone, or as vanguard with the military brass and top White House brass behind him marching in formation. And there's not a fencing contractor in sight. They were coming later. It just doesn't fly. It makes no sense whatsoever. And it's a cover your ass position. And maybe the most galling thing about it was that the first reports I saw of it from the mainstream, top network media was just sort of accepting that as the truth. Well, guess what? It wasn't for the president at all. It was for a fencing contractor, as opposed to saying this new claim is that they were bringing in fencing contractors to put up a protective fence. And the president was like, oh, what? I didn't even know. I had no idea. And gosh, that's so stupid. That's sort of the way I took it. Let's start with Mark's piece as a starting point here. Claims that Lafayette Square was not cleared for Trump don't hold up to even a cursory examination. Yeah, pretty much. And just like that, it never happened. Donald Trump and William Barr never ordered an attack on peaceful Black Lives Matter protesters in Lafayette Square on June 1st, 2020. Mounted federal officers never rode down working journalists and members of the clergy. That's a good point too, right? Everyone knows that starting the foundation of a good fence is beating the crap out of Australian journalists. Most people say, well, dig a good hole, make sure it's deep enough to sink the fence posts, you get some cement, right? Put the posts up first, come back later. No, first thing to do, beat the crap out of journalists who are there covering a protest, because obviously, it's one thing to say protesters probably wouldn't move wouldn't yield way necessarily without a fight for the purpose of putting up a fence to keep them further away from the White House. But journalists will, generally speaking, move, take a few pictures, and then get out of the way. Might as well beat the crap out of them to make sure, though. Can't be too careful. Anyway, heavily armed officers from the Bureau of Prisons and Park Police in riot gear never fired rubber bullets, flashbangs, and, yes, tear gas into a chanting crowd and drove them from the area across the White House, generating numerous injuries, all so that Donald Trump could walk across the street, hold a Bible over his head, and conduct a violent, ugly, and utterly disgusting photo op. Seizing on a report issued on Wednesday by Mark Lee Greenblatt, an Inspector General at the Department of the Interior, right-wing media, and mainstream media, unfortunately, is engaging in a smug round of I told you so on Thursday morning, as that report confirms, quote-unquote, confirms that Trump has made from the outset, I guess confirms that claim that he's made from the outset, in which he claimed that the square was not violently cleared for the purposes of his self-aggrandizing tough guy march. Instead, says the report, and this is a Trump appointee doing this work here, the decision was made 2 days earlier to protect the safety of contractors hired to install a new fence. Frustratingly, it's not just OANN, One American News, that's reporting this claim, but ABC News, USA Today, Chicago Sun-Times, and dozens of others. There's only one problem with the report, or two, or maybe three, four. There are at least four. Okay, here we go. The first of these is that it utterly ignores how Trump appeared in the Rose Garden minutes before the assault began. As he did so, both Barr and the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, in full uniform, went to the area directly across from Lafayette Square and were clearly directing the actions of the National Guard and Park Police before and during the assault. Then those same units fell in beside Trump and escorted him for his stroll to St. John's Episcopal Church, where he posed for a photo op with and without his entourage while holding a Bible stiffly and upside down above his head. The report is very precise on the timing of events when it comes to clearing the area across from the White House. And here, I guess, quotes the report itself. The operation began at 6:23 p.m. That's full 20 or 37 minutes before curfew, by the way, and was completed by 6:50 p.m. Shortly thereafter, at 7:01 p.m., President Trump walked from the White House through Lafayette Park to St. John's Church. At 7:30 p.m., the contractor began assembling and installing the anti-scale fence and completed the work by approximately 12:30 a.m. on June 2nd. According to the report, it's that second thing, the installation of the fence, that was the whole purpose of clearing the park. And the entire evidence to support this is that the U.S. Park Police, this is the quote, the U.S. Park Police did not know about the president's potential movement until mid to late afternoon on June 1st, while plans to clear the park had been made hours earlier. Ooh, whole hours, really? The idea that there could have been plans to clear the park and that those plans might have been made more urgent and violent by the desire for Trump to make his stroll never seems to have been considered. In a whistleblower report from September 2020, National Guard Major Adam DeMarco provided sworn testimony that the decision to conduct a violent assault on protesters was a decision in fact made well in advance. Those plans included not just stockpiling tear gas and other, quote, less lethal weapons, but acquiring 7,000 rounds of ammunition. Planning for the event even included asking for two other weapons, one that would have attacked the crowd with sound, and the other that would have literally cooked them with a beam of microwaves. According to the IG report, All of this was done so that the protesters could be cleared from the park a half hour before curfew began for the benefit of fence contractors. Contractors who were assembling what was just another barrier in a series of barriers that had already been raised. The report does not provide any other examples in which the federal government suggested the use of heat rays or issued live ammunition for constructing a fence. Not even the border wall got that, by the way, I'll add. In another issue, with the they did it for the fence scenario, is that Trump, Barr, and any number of former White House officials already made the claim that the reason the park was cleared so suddenly and forcefully, claims of violence on the part of protesters, along with claims that the federal police actions were unrelated to the Bible-waving strut, came the explanation that protesters were engaged in violence, specifically that they were hurling objects at officers, and that was why the Bureau of Prisons and Park Police forces rushed in. There was also the sworn testimony from U.S. Park Police Chief Gregory Monahan, who, as the Washington Post reported last September, said that, quote, violence by protesters spurred his agency to clear the area ahead of the D.C. mayor's 7 p.m. curfew with unusually aggressive tactics. All of these claims of violence are counter to the clear evidence recorded at the scenes by individuals and news cameras that showed peaceful protesters chanting in Lafayette Square until the attack takes them by complete surprise. And Moynihan's claim might be easier to believe, Monahan's claim, Moynihan got mentioned earlier today, I guess that's what did it. Monahan's claim might be easier to believe had not all the audio recordings of park police communications that day gone conspicuously missing. Finally, just 2 weeks ago, the Department of Justice asked the federal judge to toss a quartet of lawsuits, that's where I came into it, involving Barr's ordering a violent clearing of peaceful protesters from Lafayette Square. Those requests do not mention offense. What they do mention is that efforts to clear the square were a matter of, quote, presidential safety, and that, quote, Trump and other U.S. officials are immune from civil lawsuits over police actions taken to protect a president and to secure his movements. If the action was actually taken to allow the installation of a fence, why is the DOJ arguing in court that this was a police action taken to protect the president and secure his movements? Some bullet points here to help sum up from Major DeMarco's testimony. It's clear that the National Guard and Park Police forces were told to clear the square no matter what it took, including bringing in live ammunition and seeking weaponry that's been outlawed on the battlefield. From Monahan's testimony and the statements of White House officials, including William Barr, it's clear that the position of the Park Police and Bureau of Prisons forces is that they acted because of protester violence that did not actually occur. The Department of Justice is engaged in legal argument that the clearing of Lafayette Square was done specifically to clear the way for Trump, and no one, not DeMarco, not Monahan, not the DOJ, mentioned anything about protecting fencing contractors anywhere in their sworn testimony. The Secret Service may well have obtained new fencing on June 1st and may have planned to put it up that evening after the curfew went into effect, but none of that had anything to do with the violent assault that began before the curfew. That assault was clearly directed by Barr, planned well in advance to coordinate with Trump's Rose Garden appearance, and took place in spite of protesters definitively not being violent. So, it sums it up nicely, certainly, but it's the big story of the day, and I don't know. I'm hopeful that by the end of the day, the conventional wisdom becomes that the IG report was a ridiculous attempt at whitewash and ought to be dismissed out of hand. The sad story is that it simply wasn't initially, and it seems so transparent, and it seems like it would have been so easy to say this really strains credibility, I guess. Strains credulity, perhaps. You might, that's the better combination, I think. Anyway, a lot of things happened with the clearing of the square that I just have never associated with fencing contractors, including, like I said, live ammunition, tear gas. bringing in helicopters, military helicopters to hover low over the crowds and drive people away with jet wash. All unique and unusual parts of the fence raising process as I normally understand it. Let's see, a couple other people commenting on the subject as well. Mark summing things up on Twitter with his own thread. NYC Southpaw pretty much parsing the same material, although drawing directly from the report and pointing out the fairly large leaps in logic that you have to buy into in order to give any credence whatsoever to this theory. And yeah, I mean, I don't know, just sort of a sad state of affairs. But anyway, I thought I would at least make mention of that and note that that's a topic of much discussion this morning. Man, let's see. Other things that we should catch up with. Oh, Greg has sent us something new here. McConnell on Fox says he hasn't given up hope for a bipartisan infrastructure deal with Biden. Isn't that nice? It's good to know that he hasn't given up on it. I guess he's trying to help continue the cover of, well, I guess the work of the backup group. I don't know. All right, let's see. Other things to catch up on, and there are many. But yeah, how to prioritize them, I don't know. Let's see what we can squeeze in before our next break. I really do kind of want to play a little bit of that audio of Lauren Boebert doing her questioning, but I think we saved time by saying, essentially, one, it was ridiculous, and two, it was they're speaking to budget officials from the White House, and her question, such as it is, was she put it in a very specific way, and I almost feel like, well, maybe we can roll her asking the question once, but then we'll save time by noting for the record she asks the question repeatedly because no one answers the question because it's dumb, it's not a question, and it's not something that a budget official would have anything to say about. And I mean, they gamely try to, provide some information. It's interesting because the response to the question is almost, it actually reminds me of nothing so much as the way the press frequently during the Trump administration normalized Trump's rambling addresses and responses to questions from the press by trying to build a construct around this random string of words that Trump had said to try and find some context to make it make sense. And eventually, the White House official here, it's Shalanda Young, who's, I think, one of the, as Oliver puts it, is deputy budget director at the White House. And, well, anyway, she begins to try to use the fact that she's been asked a question by a member of Congress to kind of sort of touch on the subject that she's asking about, but not really acknowledge the premise of the question, because the premise of the question is terrible. We should just roll it here and you'll hear the premise of the whatever the hell it is.
I think the one question I have for you, Director.
Let me see if I can turn this up a little bit too. Let's see. This is, I'll take this over to the audio stuff here. All right. It's coming through from Firefox. Let me boost the audio a little bit because she's hard to hear because she's remote from her restaurant. All right. So I think this is right about where she asks the question the first time.
And most Americans have for this president and this administration.
Maybe that's not much better, but okay. You hear her preface. This is my question for you, and I think most Americans have this question, and blah, 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 and here's the non-question.
Most Americans have for this president and this administration is just how long will you be ceding the southern border to the cartel?
And I'll just pause it there. There's a little pregnant pause there before we begin to get the response, but you can see why. It's a budget hearing, and she says, my question, and everybody has this question, normal people all over America, they all want to know the answer to this question. And the question is, and I don't know if you heard it, how long will this administration be ceding the southern border to the cartels? All right, well, one, nobody's ceding the southern border to anybody. Two, if it was ceding it to somebody, it wouldn't be the cartels. Three, I guess cartels is supposed to be shorthand for drug smugglers, etc., and so they're automatically bad, etc., and I've cast you as being pro-villain or whatever. But, there's no way in which a budget official is going to have an answer for any of this because, one, it's not happening, and two, what are you going to say, that's on point? Well, there's no budgetary line item for ceding the border to the cartels, so if it's not authorized in the budget, we're definitely not doing it. That's the only answer you can really give. But she has learned, I guess, from watching the Maxine Waters trick of reclaiming my time, that when the non-answer comes, because how can you answer, she just says, reclaiming my time, and then does it all over again. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Did all of the comments on the way out to the break actually get through? The real point that I was trying to make there is that Lauren Boebert, picking up on, I guess, what she was able to learn from observing Maxine Waters in particular, who I think made the, it's a standard thing to do, but she may have made it famous. Although a couple other members of Congress have used it to great effect too. When you ask if you ask an actual question of a witness that they actually can and should be answering, but instead they evade answering it and seek to filibuster by using up the 5 minutes, the entirety of the 5 minutes that you're allotted for your questions and answers, very often members will say, well, reclaiming my time, because they control the time and are only ceding it to the witnesses to answer questions. But if the question isn't being answered, or even if it is, the member retains the right to reclaim their time and pose another question or pose an objection to what they've just heard or whatever. So what Boebert does here is, look, I think we can fire up the base by making it, by fanning the flames around immigration issues. And the way we've done it, of course, in addition to being just anti-immigrant in general, sometimes they like to cover themselves by saying, well, I'm not anti-immigrant. We love immigrants. After all, we make them work in our kitchen here at our restaurant all the time. We're really concerned with super serious accusations that the southern border is controlled by drug cartels, or Al-Qaeda is sneaking in over the southern border, or whatever. And, okay, so that rings bells for our base. And everybody loves to rail against international drug cartels because they're bad. And I understand all of that. But she's asking somebody, about, not even asking, well, what are you doing, or what elements are there included in the president's next proposed budget, say, for combating the influence of drug cartels at our southern border. Instead, she comes up with this dumb premise of, basically, and she frames it too, like she never heard that the old saw about it being ineffective, even as a trap, to ask when did you stop beating your wife question, right? When are you going to stop ceding our southern borders to cartels. And, well, if they say right now, then we nailed them, because that means they admit that they were doing it. Well, what if they say, that's such a dumb question, you should be kicked in the face and thrown out of Congress and dissolved in acid? I mean, it's if the answer is, well, no one is ceding the southern border to cartels or anyone else, and no one ever has done that, and it's clearly a non-serious question, and maybe you want to reclaim your time and ask a better one, is the real answer. But she's too polite, sort of, at first. I mean, I feel like I shouldn't play the whole exchange, but just to give you the flavor of it, she basically says, well, the last administration was doing terrible, stupid things at the border, and we're undoing that and spending our money wisely at the border. And that irritates Lauren Boebert enough for her to say, oh, reclaiming my time. Again, I want to ask you, and what's the second go around at the question? It's, when will you stop ceding the southern border to the cartels? And then finally, I guess in the second approach, Ms. Young here says, well, look, I just don't accept the premise. It's dumb, and I'm not going to do it. And then Lauren Boebert is like, well, okay, our time is up. Thank you. So you can see why the people in Pueblo and the surrounding areas are frustrated with Lauren Boebert. There's showboats and there's workhorses. But if you're going to be a showboat, you got to be a good showboat. You can't be that bad at things and just ruin your own stunt. It's just not going to work. It's not going to look good. Let's see. What is this? Oh, okay. This is somebody else. Shannon Watts actually discussing Boebert's background and the various times that she's been in trouble with the law. So never mind. We've been over that, and I'll skip that. There's a lot of other things I want to get to, but I'll give you access to Oliver Willis's circulated clip of Boebert so you can hear it for yourself. It's clearly, to me, it's worth listening to, but gosh, there's just so much else going on here that I want to get to. And why don't we shift gears then? Or maybe there's one more item we can add to the Lafayette Square situation. I also put aside for consideration this bit from Talking Points memo. I don't know how many times I'm going to have to click on it to get it to actually open, but here we go. Kate Riga, writing for TPM. Headline here is, starting with the quote, "Are you freaking kidding me? New report paints Trump surprising officers amid chaos at Lafayette Square." And I guess that's a quote from one of the cops. They seemed to have no idea that the president had any plans to go anywhere. And so, that to me undermines the legitimacy of the operation all by itself. Now, bringing the fencing into it, I don't know. But I think this may have been written up prior to the release of the IG report about the fencing. But let's see what she has to say here. A new report from it's about that. From the Inspector General. Paints a chaotic picture of law enforcement formulating a plan to clear Lafayette Square in D.C. and put up higher fencing amid protests last summer, a scheme foiled by poor coordination, unauthorized use of tear gas, and a surprise visit by President Donald Trump. The episode has become one of the most iconic images of the Black Lives Matter protests that roiled D.C. last summer, as protesters were brutally removed from the square shortly before Trump took a photo in front of the church, holding the Bible aloft. Some reporting suggested that then Attorney General Bill Barr ordered the area be cleared so that Trump could take the photo. The new report says the square wasn't cleared for that, but rather plans already in motion on June 1st to clear out protesters and ring the park with higher anti-scale fencing to separate officers and protesters. Around 6:10 p.m., the report details, Barr stopped by the park, immediately provoking protesters who recognized him. The park police operations commander told Barr that the area was unsafe and asked him to move further from the crowd. Barr asked why a crowd remained on H Street, saying that he thought the protesters would be gone by that point. The operations commander told Greenblatt's team, who's Greenblatt? I don't even know. Let's see. Where's the first mention of Greenblatt here? I don't know. They just jump in, as a matter of fact, and say, there we go. He's Greenblatt is the Inspector General. Okay, great. U.S. Park Police Inspector General. I thought he was an Interior Department Inspector General, but I guess that's the general overarching department where the Park Police report to. Anyway, Operations Commander told Greenblatt's team that Barr asked, "Are these people still going to be here when POTUS comes out?" So Barr's concern clearly is the president's appearance. He doesn't say, "Are these people still going to be here when the fencing contractors come out?" Because, come on, Bill Barr is never going to be concerned with whether the fencing contractors have it cleared for them. He doesn't care. The operations commander, who hadn't known that Trump was planning a visit, responded, "Are you freaking kidding me?" according to the report. He then hung his head and walked away. Barr left the park, and the operations commander maintained that Barr did not instruct him to clear the area. The U.S. Park Police Incident Commander, too, said that the plan was in motion before Barr's arrival and that his visit did not alter the operation or timeline. This plan doesn't get developed in 2 minutes, he says, per the report. That's actually sounds like contradictory. But it's presented as other than that. The Attorney General might be a very important guy in the government, but he's just not my boss. When officers decided to begin clearing the square, things quickly devolved into chaos. The Park Police Incident Commander planned to give the protesters 3 warnings to disperse before officers started physically pushing people out. The report details that the warnings were very hard to hear among a chaotic and noisy atmosphere, and that many protesters expressed confusion about what the commander was saying. Then, even before the commander had given the final warning, Secret Service, Park Police, and Arlington County Police Department, they're out of their jurisdiction, but they called in, the civil disturbance units, all deployed, visibly surprising many of the protesters. The warnings, hard to hear and incomplete as they were, also did not point protesters toward a safe pathway to exit that would have been allowed by the police to allow them to avoid oncoming officers. That frenzy intensified when members of the Metropolitan Police Department, the D.C. cops, used tear gas. And as a matter of fact, they used the chemical name here, chlorobenzilidine, chlorobenzilidine, malonitrile, or CS gas. I don't know why. C, chlorobenzene, whatever, but I don't know where the S comes from. Anyway, colloquially known as tear gas, because that's a lot easier to pronounce even than the word colloquially, which the report said the Park Service had not authorized, Park Police. The Metropolitan Police Department Assistant Chief of Police later confirmed that the MPD did use CS gas on 17th Street and told us that it did so in response to protesters who engaged in acts of violence against officers after the Park Police cleared Lafayette Square and began pushing protesters towards 17th. The MPD also told us that its internal investigation determined MPD officers used CS gas on 17th Street on June 1st. The Park Police previously denied that CS gas was used on protesters. The report details that some Park Police officers were also surprised by the MPD's use of unauthorized irritants, forced to stop and strap on gas masks as they felt its effect. In addition, the report found officers with the Bureau of Prisons may have fired pepper balls into the crowd on June 1st, again, contrary to the Park Police Incident Commander's instructions. Many have criticized law enforcement agencies for charging before the city's 7 p.m. curfew, which the mayor had imposed as tensions ratcheted up. The report found that officers were eager to get up the fencing as quickly as possible to put a barrier between them and protesters before night fell, a time that had marked an uptick in violence during the past few days of protests. The report ends by recommending that the Park Police write out more detailed procedures and requirements for situations like the protests in the square, including the number of warnings required and how better to ensure that protesters can actually hear them. The IG also recommended that Park Police figure out how to manage multi-agency operations to make sure they're all operating under the same rules and expectations. And the full report is available in the TPM link, so you can read it and review it for yourself if you wish. That's a great report, by the way. You guys should figure out a way to do that better. Okay, thanks for the investigation, pal. All right. Now we got to shift gears. There's at least 2 or 3, well, let's say 2 other things I would want to bring to your attention. First, Nate Cohn, who I usually don't call on for the show, actually has identified an interesting possibility. Part of the game, and I don't know that it doesn't definitely solve the problem. It doesn't by itself make everything happen. And I'm a little hesitant to even go because, of course, it's a bulwark, and that's usually an area you have to have a trained guide in walking through the bulwark, and Greg usually takes us through there. But on top of which, it is Mona Charen writing at the bulwark, and that makes me uncomfortable for a number of reasons. But there's a germ of an idea here, maybe better distilled out by Nate than by Mona, who is dealing with Republican intransigence on voting rights issues in the Senate, but specifically H.R. 1. And, of course, she's Mona Charen, arch-conservative, although she's probably among the anti-Trumpers. But she starts from a premise that makes us squeamish. Don't cry for H.R. 1 is the headline. Amend the Electoral Count Act instead. And that makes Armando's ears prick up. And let's see. Shall we run through her options and then through Nate's and then remind you of what Armando had to say? That'll probably eat up the rest of the show. We can give it a try. When Senator Joe Manchin, she writes, announced that he would oppose the For the People Act, Steve Bannon of MSNBC spoke for many Democrats when he declared that Joe Manchin is prepared to be remembered by history as the senator who did little more than hope as his country's democracy unraveled. We've heard a lot about that viewpoint in the past couple of days. One can share Democrats' alarm about the state of our democracy without, if you're Mona Charen, concluding that the For the People Act was the answer. In fact, none other than the New York Times editorial board argued that this bill is poorly tailored. We'll go ahead and give the quote from the New York Times and then reflect on this a little bit. Democrats in Congress have crafted an election bill, H.R. 1, that is, they say, poorly matched to the moment. The legislation attempts to accomplish more than is currently feasible while failing to address some of the clearest threats to democracy, especially the prospect that state officials will seek to overturn the will of voters. True, problematic. I've often heard in the last couple of weeks Democrats saying, like Joe Manchin, but other Democrats saying, H.R. 1, doesn't seem complete. In some places it overreaches. The more important thing we keep hearing, say, from Joe Manchin and others, not just Joe Manchin types, but plenty of Democrats in good standing, that the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, and it's H.R. 4, I think, does a much better job in directly managing the threats most immediately emerging from Republican manipulation of elections, and that's the more important of the two. Okay, fine. So it's not just Mona Charen saying it here. H.R. 1, she goes on to say, is a mashup of sound ideas, requiring a paper record for each vote, for instance, with outdated and arguably unconstitutional measures like banning so-called dark money at a time when small dollar donations are more important, and limiting speech, which the ACLU, among others, opposes sometimes. Some are now saying the Democrats should turn to the John Lewis Act as a response to Republican efforts to curtail voting rights in the states, but the Lewis Act is off point also. Look, she says, Republican efforts to limit early and absentee voting are destructive because they ratify the big lie that the 2020 election was stolen. Every law that limits voting access is a message to voters saying this is necessary because the Democrats cheated. So these laws deserve the strongest condemnation, and Democrats would be justified in running ads reminding voters that Republicans were the ones acting in bad faith. But not all of these measures in these laws are objectionable. Requiring an ID strikes many people as simple common sense. An Economist/YouGov poll in April found that 64% of Americans agreed with the statement, photo ID should be required to vote in person. Again, remember, Republican person writing this. Among African Americans, 60% agreed Democrats should not die on this hill. Moreover, the far more pressing emergency is the Republican Party's loosening attachment to democratic procedures and to truth itself. As we saw in the aftermath of 2020, 147 Republican office holders were willing to decertify the Electoral College count. A few brave Republican officials resisted tremendous pressure to alter or misreport the results of elections in their states. They demonstrated integrity. For their trouble, instead of being lauded and celebrated as heroes of democracy, they've been censured by GOP committees across the country as the legend of the big lie has seized the minds of the rank-and-file Republicans. The Republican Party is barreling towards disregarding the actual vote count in a presidential contest. The John Lewis Act does not address this. It would permit the Justice Department to police voting rules that disproportionately affect minority voters in some states, but it's miles away from dealing with a problem like refusing to certify the Electoral College results. And it was never designed to do that, so it's a little unfair. But yeah, maybe that would be a good vehicle to do this with. There is something Democrats can do at the federal level to respond to the threat. They can amend the Electoral Count Act of 1887. This is something that Armando's been railing about for a long time, reminding everybody that he thinks that Section 15, which deals with the challenges available to the count, is probably unconstitutional on its face. But there's more to it, and I guess Mona's getting at some of that. Republicans, she says, would be unlikely to filibuster this law, so Democrats can pass it with a simple majority vote. I don't know about that. No need to tangle with Manchin and Senator Kristen Sinema. I've seen it spelled now both ways. I literally do not know how she spells her name. But here it's K-R-Y, and I've seen it as K-Y-R too. But maybe that's right. Kristen? I'll never get it right. And who cares? I'm angry with her. Anyway, no need to tangle with Manchin and Sinema over the filibuster. I doubt it, but okay. This law, blissfully ignored for most of its history with the exception of a couple of law review articles, was passed following the contentious Hayes-Tilden election in 1876, a contest that was so close it threatened to tear the country apart just 11 years after Appomattox. End of the Civil War, in case you don't recognize the name. The law is, by many accounts, a morass of ambiguity. That's too kind. Here is a sample of the brilliant draftsmanship. Oh my goodness, it's a long segment too. But it's meant to show what a tangle of words it is. If more than one return or paper purporting to be a return from a state shall have been received by the President of the Senate, those votes, and those votes only, shall be counted, which shall have been regularly given by the electors who are shown by the determination mentioned in Section 5 of this title to have been appointed, if the determination in said section provided for shall have been made, or by such successors or substitutes, in a case of a vacancy in the board of electors so ascertained, as have, you get the idea of how impenetrable the language is. Unless I missed a period somewhere, this, and that's only about a fifth of it, is one sentence. Laws should not be written to obscure, but to clarify. The law directs governors to certify their state's results and the slate of electors chosen by the voters, but it also specifies that in a case of a failed election, not defined, of course, it's just, that's the quote, failed election, in which the voters have not made a choice, the state legislature can step in to appoint electors. As the votes were being counted in 2020, Republican influencers like radio host Mark Levin were suggesting that state legislatures had a, quote, constitutional duty to reverse the will of the voters and name their own slate of Trump electors. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis urged Republicans in Pennsylvania and Michigan, both of which have majority Republican legislatures, to phone their representatives so that they could, quote, provide remedies. When Senator Lindsey Graham was asked by Sean Hannity about the possibility of invalidating votes, he said, everything should be on the table. The Electoral Count Act decrees that if one representative and one senator object, in writing, to the counting of any state's electoral votes, the bodies must adjourn to their chambers to debate the matter. Here's video of Vice President Biden sitting as President of the Senate rejecting objections to the Electoral College count precisely because the House members did not have a Senate co-signer. That would have been after the 2016 elections and objections to Trump's electors. As Ed Kilgore has recommended, Congress should amend the Electoral Count Act to clarify that only electoral votes certified by individual states will be counted and that the vice president's role is purely ceremonial. Further, the threshold for objections to state electoral vote counts should be much higher than 2. I would add that a supermajority should be required to decertify any state's electoral votes, not just a simple majority as the law now permits. Additionally, the law should be amended to eliminate the failed election section that empowers legislatures to substitute their preference for that of the voters. There are armies of law professors who can provide relevant language and good ideas for other changes. Forget H.R. 1, she says. Forget campaign finance. Don't perseverate. Is that right? I got even no idea. Don't persevere. Like persevere and an 8. I've never encountered perseverate, I bet, is the pronunciation. On whether poll watchers can distribute water to voters waiting in line. It's not the vote casting, but the vote counting that needs attention now. And I guess that's largely true, even though Mona Charen says it. But the most important thing, the most interesting thing about it is what Nate Cohn calls out from that. Nate Cohn, the very end, it's all added almost as an afterthought that she says, well, what about a supermajority requirement to challenge or to accept, to validate a challenge to a state's electoral votes? That's really actually pretty interesting. And this is the way Nate calls it out. If you're looking for a strategy that might heighten the contradictions of the filibuster for Manchin, this style of proposal, laws that mandate supermajorities / bipartisanship, where only majorities are needed today, is a clever route. It actually kind of is, right? In this proposal, the threshold for overturning an electoral slate would increase to a supermajority. Though one could choose, say, 60 votes or something like that. I mean, that would be a supermajority, or you could fix the number, or you could adopt the. I think the point here is to almost mock the construction of the filibuster rules, and you should probably say, 3/5 of those present and voting necessary to overturn a slate of elections or slate of electors. In this proposal, the threshold for overturning the electoral slate would increase to a supermajority to make the tension obvious. Today, currently, right, a vote to overturn a presidential election wouldn't be subject to filibuster, and it only requires 50 votes. It's pretty amazing what you can do free of the filibuster and with a simple majority. You can overturn a presidential election, but you can't vote to start debate on a bill for, whatever it is, water rights in the West, anything, without 60 votes affirmatively. Don't you think it should be at least as difficult to overturn a presidential election as it is to do anything, to rename a federal building or a court building? Because that's the situation you're in right now, and make it clear how ridiculous the filibuster is. I mean, it's kind of backhanded where you say, well, maybe the thing to do isn't to make everything subject to the same stupid rule, but at least the hard stuff, where the stuff that would overturn elections should at least be that difficult, right? He goes on to say another example might be to subject state election laws passed without bipartisan support. I mean, this goes directly to Manchin's thing, as he says, I'm only voting for something that has bipartisan support on these elections cases, or these elections bills. And everybody's pointing out, yeah, but the bills, the state laws that this bill, H.R. 1, H.R. 4, are supposed to address are being passed without minority participation. So your insistence on minority participation is making it possible for the states piecemeal to do these things without minority participation. So it's self-defeating. So one, you could consider requiring either allowing a filibuster of a challenge to an electoral slate, or affirmatively requiring a supermajority to overturn it, to reject it. Or another example might be subject state election laws passed without bipartisan support. Say, you could set a threshold, like, for instance, at least 20% of all the major parties has to have voted for such a thing in order to align it with the filibuster, and add that as a test to Voting Rights Act pre-clearance and new standards for partisan fairness, right? One of the things that the DOJ should take into account in reviewing a voting access or voting rights proposal or new laws or redistricting in the states is, did at least 20% of both major parties support this law? And if not, it should be prima facie considered, I don't know whether you want to say prima facie evidence of prejudice, but you can certainly say it weighs heavily against our pre-clearing this law. Cohn concludes here by saying, I don't see Manchin giving up on the filibuster so easy, of course, but for progressives, these kinds of laws could highlight how inaction leads to more partisan outcomes rather than encouraging bipartisanship in election administration. And I think that's actually quite right. And I don't agree a whole lot on this subject with Nate Cohn, and I almost never agree with Mona Charen on anything. They together put together a backhanded way at addressing the ridiculousness of Manchin's position here, and might just get him not to change his position on the filibuster, but put Republicans on the spot instead and say, you want to protect minority rights? Well, here's your chance to do it. And when you bail on this, we'll all know you for the hypocrites you really are. Then we'll see what happens after that.
From netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
All right, once again, plenty we didn't get to that I want to get to. We got Friday ahead of us, but more importantly, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam comes next. And I bet, as usual, a lot of the things that we haven't had room for, he gets into. Like, for instance, the Republicans repeating their voter suppression history by attacking the teaching of that history. Next.